In other news, South Korea's defense chief has stressed that Seoul will not, under any circumstances, accept North Korea as a nuclear state and will powerfully respond to its provocations. Speaking at a forum in Singapore earlier on this Monday, Song Young-moo said the most urgent and grave security threat in the Asia-Pacific region is Pyongyang's nuclear and missile development. He emphasized that Seoul will work towards a complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula through peaceful measures like dialogue and negotiation. Sanctions and pressure will only be the means of achieving this. Mentioning North Korea could have been secretly trading with other nations using foreign vessels. Minister Song urged all nations in the region to abide by UN sanctions and up the pressure on the regime.
At an international security forum, the nation's defense chief used some strong words to warn Pyongyang against using nukes to attack Seoul or Washington. According to our Oh Jung-hee, he also reassured in dealing with the regime's threats, South Korea's non-proliferation stance remains unchanged.
North Korea will be wiped off the world map should it use nuclear weapons on South Korea or the United States. That's what South Korea's Defense Minister Song Young-moo confidently stated on Monday at a security forum in Singapore. When asked whether Pyongyang has a coercive purpose to its nuclear weapons program, Minister Song said the North attacking South Korea or the U.S. won't happen for real, and that the nuclear development program is just a part of the Kim Jong-un regime's propaganda strategy. He stressed that it's, quote, anachronistic to say Pyongyang will use its nuclear weapons, but added, if it does, then the regime will be erased off the world map. And to deal with this threat, Minister Song gave assurances that South Korea won't be deploying tactical nuclear weapons, but developing stronger conventional weapons to keep peace, not go to war. The remarks came during a question and answer session after Minister Song's keynote speech at the 2018 Fullerton Forum, the very first as Seoul's defense chief. During his address, he stressed the most urgent and grave security threat in the Asia-Pacific region is Pyongyang's nuclear and missile development, and said South Korea will not under any circumstances accept North Korea as a nuclear state. He emphasized that Seoul will work towards a complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula through peaceful measures like dialogue and negotiation, saying sanctions and pressure will only be used as means of achieving this. Mentioning that North Korea could have been secretly trading with other nations using foreign vessels, Minister Song urged all nations in the region to abide by UN sanctions and up the pressure on the regime.
A Chinese warplane entered South Korea's Air Defense Identification Zone, or KADIZ, this morning. According to Seoul's Joint Chiefs of Staff, the plane appeared from the southwest of Yeoudo Island at 9:30 a.m. local time. It then entered Japan's Air Defense Identification Zone before 10 a.m. and returned home just after 2 p.m. South Korea dispatched aircraft for surveillance immediately after the plane was detected. Beijing's military planes have entered the area multiple times since the country unilaterally declared its own such zone in 2013, which overlaps with parts of Korea and Japan's areas. In mid-December, 5 Chinese warplanes flew into the KADIZ for what it claims was an ordinary drill.
And to tell us more about the defense talks, Dr. Bong Young-sik, a researcher at the Yonsei Institute for North Korean Studies, joins us in the studio today. So good to see you.
Hi.
All right. So during the talks, the two sides reaffirmed their ironclad commitment and said that North Korea cannot drive a wedge in their alliance. Tell us more about this.
The meeting between the two defense secretaries confirms that the alliance will remain ironclad, and if North Korea will engage in any form of provocation, there will be overwhelming response by both forces. So this is a reiteration of the joint commitment to maintaining peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula before, during, and after the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games.
Now, like you said, the talks came as the two Koreas are busily preparing for the North's participation in the Winter Games. So how do you think North Korea would respond to these talks, as South Korea and the U.S. are committed to continued collaboration aimed at making North Korea change its behavior?
Well, I wouldn't expect that Pyongyang would welcome this announcement, but at the same time, it has been all along very well known to everybody in the world, including the United States, Japan, and South Korea, that North Korea's participation in the Winter Pyeongchang Olympic Games is a kind of a trap. It's a tactic to drive a wedge between the allies. So this is a kind of a gambit being played between Pyongyang and South Korea and the United States on the other side. So there has been a set of preemptive actions taken by not only by South Korean government, that all this progress into Korean dialogue and South Korea's accommodations of North Korea's participation in Pyeongchang Olympic Games will not violate the existing sanctions, especially the UN Security Council resolutions.
Right.
And the United States government also made it really clear that it wouldn't allow North Korea to hijack the Winter Olympic Games, as well illustrated by the action of the Vice President Mike Pence, who's coming to join the U.S. athletes in Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games. And the coming of the Japanese Prime Minister Abe is also another measure to preemptively undercuts potential attempts by Pyongyang to hijack the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games and drive the wedge between South Korea and its allies, because the presence of a Prime Minister of Japan and the Vice President of the United States and South Korean President, in the absence of the head of the states from China and Russia, will be another opportunity for these three security partners to confirm that North Korea has to come out without insisting on any preconditions to the settlements of the nuclear crisis it created, premised upon North Korea's promise of denuclearization. There's no bargaining available to North Korea.
Then what can we expect in regards to the joint drills between Seoul and Washington, which has been postponed due to the Olympics?
Well, there are two dates that are mentioned recently. One is the 18th of March.
Okay.
The United States seems to prefer to resume the postponed joint military exercises, the Fall Eagle and the Key Resolve, as soon as possible, immediately after the end of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games, the Paralympic Games. That's the 18th of March. And another date is the 25th of March, the date proposed by the United Nations, when United Nations passed their recommendations almost unanimously that to ensure the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games as a period of peace for the entire world village. So the date will be decided either of on the 2 days or somewhere between the two dates. But James Mattis, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, made it clear several times that the United States military never pauses the joint military exercises. Postpones are possible, but pausing or significant downscale of the military exercise will not be an option.
Now, are there any chances, though, of us seeing a possible dialogue between the U.S. and North Korea, considering that there has been a thaw between the two Koreas recently?
I wish I would be able to say that there are growing possibility, but I remain rather pessimistic because North Korea holds the key. I mean, it should be from North Korea any moment, if there's be any moment for the bilateral negotiations or denuclearization of North Korea between Pyongyang and Washington. And North Korea has not really demonstrated any tangible sign that it is gravitated toward the idea. It is largely dependent upon who is going to lead the North Korean delegation, the artists and the athletes. Because as well illustrated during the inspection tour led by Ms. Hyun Sung-wol last week, then if the head of the delegation from North Korea does not have any knowledge about nuclear and missile issues or secure the instruction from top leadership, which is the chairman Kim Jong-un, to engage in a negotiation with South Korea, Japan, and the United States, then the head of the delegation would be just a figurehead, only focus on matters related to art performance festivals and sports events.
From the Olympics.
So, yeah,
right?
with
Yes.
even with the presence of the South Korean president, Japanese prime minister, and the vice president from the United States, then there cannot be any meaningful multilateral negotiations on denuclearization. So anybody other than Mr. Choi Ryong-hae, the de facto number 2 man in North Korea, if North Korean delegation will be led by somebody else, like the Kim Jong's sister or anybody else, then you can say that North Korea is not really ready to engage in negotiation on denuclearization. So pay attention to
Who's
the
coming.
person
Right.
who's being leading the North Korean delegation.
Now, we know there wasn't much discussion over the transfer of wartime operational control of South Korean troops from Washington to Seoul during the defense talks, but tell us more about this in the first place.
The transfer of the wartime OPCON, operational control, from the U.S. military in South Korea to South Korean military is now a long history. I mean, the first, it was proposed during the Nomuyon government in early 2000 as a matter of, upgrading the security partnership between Seoul and Pyongyang to become more equal sovereign security partnership. And elevate the status and capability of South Korean military equal to U.S. Forces stationing in South Korea. But there was time when the bilateral partnership was less than its ideal situation. So when the Nomuyon government tossed the idea to Washington during the time of Bush administration, the Bush administration accepted the idea, but in a not less than mostly friendly manner. So then U.S. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld even said that, sir, you are knocking on an open door. So the United States does not station its troops when they are not welcome in the midst of the wave of anti-American sentiment in South Korea was undergoing. In countering the South Korea's initial proposal to transfer the wartime control, OPCON, to South Korea by the end of 2012, the Bush administration even proposed to give it to South Korean military by the end of 2008.
Okay.
And the South Korea was far from being prepared to accept that. So the 2012 was set as a target date for the transfer, but the successors of the Nomuyon government postponed the scheduled transfer, and in 2014, at the 46th a security consultation meeting in Washington, both governments agreed not to be bound to the set date, but the wartime OPCON will be transferred to South Korea if South Korean military will have satisfied 3 major conditions, which is that the security conditions on the Korean Peninsula will be stable enough, and 2, South Korean military will have acquired sufficient capability to the initial responses to any provocation or emergency situations. And 3, when the nuclear and missile threats of North Korea will be effectively dealt by the South Korea's own military capabilities, including Korea's own missile defense system, KAMD, and the kill chain system, which will preemptively destroy the missile launchers and the artilleries. And three, the massive retaliation if North Korea is going to attack South Korea. And the initial assessment by the U.S. command of the U.S. forces in South Korea concluded that South Korean military has not acquired these three basic preconditions for wartime, OPCON transfer. So, as expressed in the joint statement by Secretary Jim Mattis and the Defense Minister of South Korea, Song Yong-moo, then both sides only agreed to further discuss the timing, the manner of the wartime, OPCON transfer tied to South Korea's defense reform.
But there had been expectations that this OPCON transfer process would be speeded up,
Right, but I mean, there's an agreement that the earlier the better. If the South Korea will emerge as an independent, military power, securing the wartime OPCON to deal with any emergency situations and provocations taking place on the Korean Peninsula. When the day comes, then South Korea will truly become the independent force, being in the so-called driver's seat to take care of the business on the Korean Peninsula. But the intentions or the desire cannot really lead these whole discussions and the process. South Korea has to be able to demonstrate that it has met these three preconditions that it has agreed to met in 2014.
What does the speeding up the transfer process mean for South Korea? Because we know that President Moon has definitely been pushing for this.
One of the reasons is with securing this wartime OPCON, the South Korean military will be regarded, counted by North Koreans as an independent variable. So far, North Korea has been just passing, South Korea aside, that we are nuclear power states, so we only need to deal with big powers such as China and the United States, so nuclear powers. So South Korea has no reasons to be included in any talks regarding the future of the Korean Peninsula, including the substituting the existing armistice agreement for the peace treaty to officially end the Korean War, or the denuclearization of North Korea as a topic of arms control between nuclear powers. So once South Korea will have its wartime operational control, then North Korea will not be able to just simply dismiss South Korea aside.
What has been the North Korea's response to this OPCON transfer plan? I mean, what impact would this have on inter-Korea relations from here now?
North Korea seems to be on a kind of a wait-and-see mode. The big target is to make a big deal with the United States to get the recognition by the United States as North Korea is indeed nuclear power state and will be treated as such. So that in exchange for making some concessions on the front of its intercontinental ballistic missile programs and nuclear weapons, North Korea wants to secure economic concessions to resuscitate its dilapidated, destroyed national economy, as well as escape from the diplomatic isolation, so that there will be the day for North Korean leadership to actually begin to realize its touted national policy, which is the simultaneous pursuit of nuclear weapon development and the economic development. It has been quite active on the first leg of this policy, but for the second leg of the policy, which is the elevating the living standard of the North Korean people, the record has been miserable by any standard. So time is against the North Korean leadership to make sure that the people will continuously support the regime and trust the regime's promises. The North Korean reactions to this discussion between Washington and Seoul about the potential transfer of the wartime OPCON will be try to be exploited by Pyongyang in that context.
Shifting our focus a little bit, I mean, the Pyeongchang Winter Games is quickly approaching, and we know that North Korea is likely to hold a big military parade and events just a day before the opening of the Pyeongchang Winter Games in celebration of its 70th anniversary of its foundation of its military. But South Korean Unification Minister Cho Myung-kyun said that the North's military parade and events is irrelevant to the Winter Games and that its timing is just coincidental. What are your thoughts on this?
It proves once again that North Koreans have an impeccable sense of spoiling somebody else's celebration and birthday, weddings.
Party pooper.
Party pooper, right. And the Minister of Unification, Cho Myung-kyun's explanation is a genuine one because the change of the date to celebrate the establishment of its armed forces has changed to the 8th of February since 2015. But had the North Korean leadership had a more, sophisticated sense of timing and strategic minds, then the leadership might have used it as another, bargaining chips towards Seoul and Washington. But judging from the fact that it is going to just go ahead with the military parade on the eve of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games, I detect that its engagement policy toward the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games is not so sophisticated or well coordinated because the military parade will just pour the cold water to the any warm image of North Korea that had been created by North Koreans themselves by sending the inspection team led by iconic personas like the Mr. Hyun Sung-won and whatnot. So what's the point of agreeing to send a massive artists, musicians and athletes if that warm and kind image of North Korea will be soon spoiled by totally different image of North Korea during the military parade?
It's totally portraying itself as two-sided, right?
Right.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much for your insight today.
You're welcome.